Hi, everyone.
Greetings. We're on page 150 of the Proclaimer's book. The new chapter is How We Came to Be Known as Jehovah's Witnesses, and they've laid a foundation for the discussion by admitting that in the early church, Christians were known as Christians.
By divine providence.
By divine providence, the way you've translated it,
Mm-hmm.
and also called the way, but you're making the case now that somehow things changed and you had to do what you did in 1931.
You couldn't use either of those.
Yeah, and I thought that the sidebar here in that first section is significant. The name Christian became distorted in the public mind. But the churches in Christendom never thought it necessary to change the name that they were called by. That's where Christendom came from. It's the domain or the dominion of Jesus Christ. But they don't do what you do with it, which is to say, how do we know the true Christians if everybody's called by the name of Christ? They didn't have a problem.
Yeah.
And so in your discussion of how denominations, or specifically Protestant denominations, get their names, I think you missed the point entirely.
Yeah. You think that because they have different denomination names, they can't all be Christian. Because you already have it in your mind there can only be one group. Whereas Christians, the denomination names tend to reflect their convictions. So or it's a descriptive of what they emphasize or what they find of importance.
Yes, they don't think of themselves as having all the truth like you do.
Mm-hmm.
So then it becomes a descriptive that defines why we are different maybe than other Christians. So look at the way they deal with this here, though.
They can share pulpits, different
Yes.
denominations, and they do frequently.
And if you talk to the average Protestant and ask him, what religion are you? He won't say, I am a Presbyterian or I am a Methodist. He will say, I'm a Christian. And then you have to ask him more precisely, well, what church do you affiliate with or attend? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So their subhead here kind of betrays the case of where they're coming from, which is it is derisive nicknames. So here's how they start their analysis. From the 16th century onward, this situation, that is the situation of distortion of the name Christian, posed a problem for the reformers, and they capitalize reformers, which is another indication that they don't really understand what they're critiquing. Reformers is not a denominational name, it's a tendency.
Mm-hmm.
Since the name Christian was being used so loosely, how could they distinguish themselves from others who claimed to be Christians? Often they simply acquiesced, so that's a moral fault you're attributing to the Reformed people, right? The Reformed Reformation, as you see it, to the use of a derisive nickname given to them by their enemies. Thus, theological opponents of Martin Luther in Germany were the ones that first applied his name to his followers, calling them Lutherans. But it was an accurate description, nevertheless.
Yeah,
right?
and they wouldn't view it as a negative name.
That's right.
Yeah.
Those associated with John Wesley in England were labeled Methodists. But nowadays they're usually called as a tendency rather than a denominational name, Wesleyan.
Mm-hmm.
Just like some are called Calvinists, some are called Lutheran, some are called Wesleyan, but it's not really a descriptive of even the denomination. Correctly, you say that is called Methodism.
Yeah, it's not so much the person they're even talking about, they're just talking about the tendency of thinking.
That's right. So they say those associated with John Wesley in England were labeled Methodists because they were unusually precise and methodical in the observance of religious duties. True.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's accurate. Baptists at first resisted the nickname Anabaptist, meaning rebaptizer, but gradually adopted the name Baptist as a sort of compromise. Again, you're attributing moral failure to them for compromising. It happens to define why they're distinctive, the Baptists, from Presbyterians and Methodists and many others.
Yeah.
The older churches too. Now they're getting to themselves. What about the Bible students?
Mm-hmm. They were dubbed Russellites and Rutherfordites by the clergy, but adopting such a name would have fostered a sectarian spirit. It would have been inconsistent with the reproof given to early Christians by the Apostle Paul, who wrote, when one says, I belong to Paul, but another, I to Apollos. Are you not simply men, that is, in fleshly outlook instead of spiritual? Oh, that is fleshly in outlook instead of spiritual. Some people labeled them Millennial Dawnists, but Christ's millennial reign was only one of their teachings. Others called them Watchtower people, but that too was inappropriate, for the Watchtower was merely one of the publications that they used to disseminate Bible truth.
Well, again, as we've said, Lutherans, when they're calling themselves Lutherans, are actually speaking accurately, and so are Methodists, and so are Baptists, about what distinguishes them from other Christians, who they would admit are Christians. But these names that you say were derisive, or nicknames given by clergy, no, they actually depict the truth. So Millennial Dawnist, for instance, that's what you have on the cover of your books in those days, as well as the name of the person who wrote is C.T. Russell, so Russellites is explained by that.
It illustrates what your emphasis is.
Yeah. So to say at the end of this paragraph that, well, it was just one of their teachings, no, it was their principal teaching. Their main emphasis during the first 50 years of their existence was, we have the truth about the millennium. We're already in it. They believed that they were in it from 1870 to 1873.
So this use of 1 Corinthians 3:4 saying, I belong to Paul, Lutherans don't say, I belong to Luther, or I belong to Calvin. You know, that's not the point here. But with witnesses, you might not say, I belong to Russell, or I belong to Rutherford, but you might as well say that because you only listen to them.
That's right.
And what they say has to be truth. It's the final word for you. Even later, when we were listening really still to Rutherford a lot, but also to Freddie Franz, because he wrote most of the books, even then, when you had something that you had to figure out, your thinking was not, I wonder what the Bible says about this. It was, what does the Watchtower say?
That's right.
So you would go and you would research Watchtower literature, not the Bible, Watchtower literature, to find out. And you called yourselves the truth. So that betrays that you really think it's all in one place.
So when the clergy, and by the way, it wasn't just the clergy who called you Rutherfordites and Russellites, you identified yourselves by that. Whether you call yourself IBSA, International Bible Students, that's not on the book. What's on the cover of the book is the name Russell, or Millennial Dawn, or in the days after that, the so-called Rainbow Series, what name is on every one of those books?
Yeah.
Rutherford.
And now you
they
have
know
a new
immediately
brand.
We're talking about a cultic group, even if not yet fully formed cult.
Yeah. And now you have a new brand. It's jw.org. And you must follow and submit and believe whatever the governing body tells you. That is following men.
So when you took the name Jehovah's Witnesses, which we won't get to in this one, but in the next subhead, when you took that name, you've branded yourself very clearly as outside Christendom. I mean, that's Rutherford's effort, which is nobody else in Christian history took the name Jehovah. To you, that's a bragging point, but it also shows you're not Christian, because the early church does not publicize the name Jehovah, as you've already admitted here. The name, Christ is prominent. Not only in the early church is it prominent, 900 times in the New Testament, Jesus is mentioned, Jehovah 0, but throughout Christian history. So Christian history, Christendom, is consistent with the data and the emphases of the New Testament.
I would say another point that we were thinking of when we were preparing this was think of Israel, the Jews of Jesus' day. This was kind of something that I don't know why I missed it, because I know there's Pharisees and Sadducees, but when you're a witness, they're kind of interchangeable. You don't think of them as being different, other than
opposing parties,
other than resurrection. That was the only thing I remembered. But they still called themselves Jews, whether they were Sadducees or Pharisees.
That's
but they had different emphasis, different distinctives.
Didn't particularly like each other.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, they recognized we are the people of God, we are Israel, we are the Jews.
And they met together. They fellowshiped together in spite of their differences. They got together and probably argued a lot, but they got together and fellowship.
And that's a sense of identity that you don't relate to at all if you're a witness,
No.
or any cult really, which is, no, it's us versus them. It's not
Yeah.
just us and them and we prefer us, because that's,
Yeah.
let's admit it, that's the Protestant thing, and it's also the Catholic and the Orthodox thing. You can grant that there are other people, there are Christians out there, but you prefer your thing.
Yeah.
So that it's true that Christendom, all the denominations have that in common, or they wouldn't be in the denominations they're in.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't compromise the central truth that you all represent, namely
Yeah.
that Jesus Christ is the Savior and the Lord.
Yeah. But you, as a witness, think everyone thinks like you do.
Exactly.
And think that they're exclusively the truth. That's just not so.
But this branding that you've referred to, jw.org, I mean, this is a new development. This is even more brazen than Jehovah's Witnesses as a name, which is, you have branded yourself now by an acronym. Not good.
Yeah.
You can't even pretend this is biblical.
So we did want to acknowledge there are groups that will kind of go in that direction, like the witnesses.
Sure.
And be almost cultic in their, like we have it and you guys don't, and can be very narrow and just listening to themselves.
This is true, but they're the smaller denominations,
That's
like
right.
the Churches of Christ think of themselves as the people having the truth, and they tend to avoid other Christians, it's true. So they're on the fringe. But they're also a restoration movement, like the people who followed them. A restoration movement based in the 1810s, 20s, 30s. All the cults come into the same period. It's this idea that we've restored the truth.
Yeah.
There's the bottom line for almost all these groups, including Islam, by the way. They were saying that a lot long before you were. They were saying it in the 7th century. We're restoring the truth of the religion of Abraham, etc. So this idea is poisonous, and it's all over the place, not just in Jehovah's Witnesses. What are our links?
The first one is Hokema. That's probably not how you pronounce his name.
Hokema is probably the legit pronunciation. Anthony Hokema.
So the first of a series from his book, Four Major Cults. What makes JWs a cult, not a sect, not a denomination. And the second one is the first of a series from a tract called
Slaves of Men.
Slaves of Men. Yeah.
5 characteristics of cultic, notice the word cultic, not cult, cultic groups, because they do exist within Protestantism for sure.
Yeah. So you could watch all three, but the first one we're going to put on the screen.
See you next time.